In a forgotten mountain town, wrapped in storm and silence, a loyal German shepherd is thrown from a moving car in the dead of night. Alone in the blizzard, he chases the fading taillights until they vanish into darkness. But what if that night was not an ending, but the beginning of a miracle? What if God led him to the one man who had lost faith long ago, so together they could learn how love survives, even in the coldest places? Tell us where you are watching from, and stay until the end to see how the storm at Silver Ridge changed everything. The wind screamed through the mountain pass like an angry ghost. Silver Ridge, a forgotten town clinging to the northern Rockies, lay buried beneath a storm that had no mercy. Snow whirled across the cracked asphalt highway, swallowing road signs and muffling every sound except the groaning of pine trees bending under white weight. The neon sign of Turner's Gas and Supply flickered in the darkness, half its letters dead, the other half pulsing in blue and pink, casting a lonely glow across the snow-drenched station. A white SUV tore through the storm, headlights slicing through the swirling frost. Inside, the heater hummed, the windows fogged, and a man's silhouette gripped the wheel. The woman beside him whispered, "Just do it," her voice trembling, not from cold, but from something uglier. The car screeched to a halt beside the empty road. The rear door opened. Out leapt Duke, a 3-year-old German shepherd with thick sable and snow fur, built strong but lean from long runs and harsh winters. His amber eyes burned with the kind of loyalty only betrayal can shatter. He had been raised by that very couple since he was a pup, trained, protective, and endlessly forgiving. But tonight, his trust met its end. A hand shoved him hard into the snow. Duke stumbled, barked once, confused, watching the SUV lurch forward. Its taillights bled red into the white storm before vanishing entirely. He ran after it, paws cutting into the frost, but the blizzard devoured his path and his hope in one breath. Snow gathered on his muzzle as he slowed, panting, each breath crystallizing in the frigid air. Alone, in the vast silence of Silver Ridge, he lifted his head and howled, a sound too raw to be called animal, too heartbroken to be human. From the edge of the highway, behind the flickering neon, someone heard. Eli Turner, the owner of the gas station, stepped out from the doorway, his boots crunching against the ice. Eli was in his early 50s, tall but slightly stooped, with salt and pepper hair curling beneath a worn beanie. His face was marked by years of wind and solitude, and his blue eyes carried both gentleness and the fatigue of a man who had outlived too many goodbyes. Once, he had been a mechanic in Denver, known for his humor and steady hands. But after his wife Marion passed away 5 winters ago from cancer, Eli sold their house and moved to Silver Ridge, a town where silence could hide the sound of grief. Now he lived above the gas station, fixing old engines and selling coffee to passing truckers, each day like the last. When he saw the dark shape moving in the storm, Eli's heart clenched. He walked out, his parka flapping, carrying a flashlight that barely pierced the blizzard. "Hey there," he muttered softly, voice nearly lost to the wind. "You lost, buddy?" The beam caught Duke's eyes, 2 golden lights staring back, wary yet pleading. Eli knelt slowly, extending a hand. Duke didn't move. His fur was caked in snow. His legs trembled. The storm howled around them like a curse, and Eli realized the dog wasn't just lost. He'd been abandoned. He returned inside briefly, rummaged through an old bread box, and came back with a half loaf of bread and a bottle of water. "Here, it's not much, but..." He placed them on the ground, then took off his own coat and draped it over Duke's back. The dog didn't eat, didn't drink. He just stared toward the direction the SUV had gone, eyes wide with a quiet disbelief that love could vanish so fast. Eli sighed. "All right then, I'll leave you be. But you can stay by the pump if you want. Wind's a bit softer here." He walked back to the doorway, giving the animal space. From inside, the flickering neon lights painted everything in shades of melancholy blue. Eli poured himself a cup of black coffee, hands trembling slightly. Through the window, he watched Duke, still sitting where he'd been dropped, unmoving, a sentinel carved in snow. The wind roared, lifting curtains of white dust around the lonely figure. Hours passed. Midnight bled into early morning. Trucks came and went on the distant road, their headlights flashing briefly across the station's facade, but no one noticed the silent vigil outside. When the clock above the counter hit 2 a.m., Eli stood, turned off the radio that played static more than music, and looked again. The dog hadn't moved. Something about that broke him. He stepped outside once more. "You stubborn one, huh?" Eli said, his voice gentler now, almost paternal. "Can't let go, can you?" The only answer was a low whine and the crunch of Duke's paws shifting slightly. Eli crouched beside him, snow collecting on his shoulders. "Guess I can't blame you," he murmured. "I waited too, for years. Sometimes, waiting's all a man can do when the good things are gone." He stayed there for a moment, breathing beside the animal, the storm finally beginning to quiet. In that stillness, something unseen passed between them, a fragile understanding, two broken souls finding shelter in each other's silence. When the last gust of wind faded, Eli rose and looked at the horizon. Somewhere beyond the ridge, dawn was struggling to break through the clouds. He glanced at the dog again. "If God brought you here," he said softly, almost to himself, "there must be a reason." He left the door slightly open as he went back inside. Duke turned once toward the dark road. Then slowly, as if the decision cost him everything he had left, he walked toward the gas station. He paused by the entrance, shook the snow off his fur, and lay down beside the door. Eli watched from inside, but said nothing. The two simply shared the same space, the same fragile warmth, while outside, the storm that had brought them together finally died away. For the first time in months, Eli whispered a prayer before sleep. "Lord," he said quietly, eyes on the ceiling, "thank you for the company." Outside, Duke lifted his head at the sound of Eli's voice, then rested it on his paws. The neon sign above them buzzed faintly, the last light in a frozen world. The storm had taken many things from Silver Ridge that winter, but on this night, beneath the broken sky, it gave something back. Morning came slow to Silver Ridge. The storm had passed, but the cold remained like a ghost that refused to leave. Snow lay piled against the pumps at Turner's Gas and Supply, glittering faintly under the pale winter sun. The air was so still that even the sound of a crow's cry seemed to echo forever between the pines. Inside, Eli Turner poured himself a cup of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. The radio crackled with news of the storm's aftermath. Roads blocked, power lines down, trucks stranded on the pass. But Eli wasn't listening. His gaze kept drifting toward the frosted window, where a large shape sat motionless outside. Duke hadn't moved much since that night. For 3 days, he had remained at the same spot near the station's door, facing the road as though expecting something, or someone, to return. Eli had placed a blanket there, a bowl of warm broth, even a few strips of bacon. But Duke only sniffed, drank a little water, and went back to waiting. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just waited. Eli understood that kind of silence. After Marion's passing, he too had waited. Waited for grief to fade, for laughter to sound natural again, for the ache in his chest to stop waking him in the middle of the night. Waiting, he had learned, could become a kind of prayer when words failed. He stepped outside, boots crunching on snow. "Morning, Duke," he said quietly, crouching beside the dog. "You keep this up, I'll have to start charging rent." His tone was light, but his eyes softened. Duke turned his head slightly, acknowledging him with a flick of his ear, then returned his gaze to the road. Eli sighed. "Guess you're stubborn like me." He went about his morning, checking the pumps, sweeping the slush from the doorstep, restocking the small shelf of snacks and canned beans. The world outside was calm now, the storm replaced by a heavy, glassy quiet that wrapped the town like a snow globe. A delivery truck passed around noon, and the driver stopped for gas. "That your dog?" he asked, nodding toward Duke. Eli shook his head. "Not mine. Just decided to stay." The driver chuckled. "Well, he looks like he's guarding the place. Got that soldier's stare." Eli smiled faintly. "Yeah, guess every outpost needs a sentry." By sunset, the sky bled orange behind the mountains, fading into deep indigo. The temperature dropped again. Eli turned the sign to "closed" and locked the doors, but he couldn't bring himself to send the dog away. He left the porch light on and placed a fresh bowl of soup outside before heading upstairs to his small room above the station. That night, the wind shifted, whispering through the eaves like a warning. Eli couldn't sleep. He tossed in his bed, the sound of the wind carrying faint memories. Marion's laughter, her voice reading scripture by the fire, her final whisper, "Don't let the world make you cold, Eli." He rose, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, and looked out the window. Below, under the flickering porch light, Duke sat again, unflinching, a dark silhouette against the snow. The sight stirred something in him, a mixture of sorrow and strange peace. Outside, Duke's breath steamed in the cold. The moon had risen above the ridge, painting the snow silver blue. For the first time in days, the wind carried something else, a sound so faint it barely seemed real. A cry. Duke's ears twitched, his head lifted sharply. He stood, nose in the air, listening. The sound came again, distant but unmistakable, a small, trembling whimper carried on the night breeze. In an instant, Duke was alert. He looked toward the dark line of trees beyond the gas station, the forest that bordered the frozen river. Something inside him, something old and instinctive, stirred. Without hesitation, he padded off the porch and into the snow, each step measured and silent. Eli noticed movement below. He opened the window. "Duke!" he called softly, but the dog was already disappearing into the tree line. Grabbing his coat, Eli hurried downstairs, flashlight in hand. The beam sliced through the night, catching flakes of snow still drifting lazily from the branches. "Duke!" he called again. Only the wind answered. Then faintly another sound reached him, a soft, high-pitched cry somewhere ahead. Duke was already there. He had followed the scent through the forest, his paws sinking deep into the snow, his breath coming in sharp clouds. Beneath a fallen spruce branch, half buried in frost, lay a small bundle of life, a puppy no more than a few weeks old. Its fur was matted with mud and ice, its ribs faintly visible beneath the fluff. Its eyes fluttered weakly. Duke nudged it gently with his nose. The pup whimpered, then tried to lift its head, failing each time. Duke lowered himself beside it, pressing his body close to shield it from the wind. His thick coat absorbed the snow, his warmth seeping into the shivering creature. Eli stumbled through the last stretch of trees, panting. When his flashlight found them, he froze. The sight, one broken soul protecting another, hit him like scripture brought to life. "Oh, Lord," he breathed. He knelt beside Duke, brushing the snow from the pup's tiny body. "You found it," he whispered. "You really found it." The pup gave a faint squeak, then nestled closer to Duke. Eli took off his gloves, cupping the fragile creature. "Come on, little one, let's get you warm." Duke followed close as Eli hurried back toward the station. Inside, he laid the pup on a towel near the heater, rubbing its fur dry with slow, careful hands. Duke stood watch, his golden eyes tracking every movement. "It's a miracle you heard her," Eli murmured, "out there in all that quiet." He poured warm milk into a bowl and held it close to the puppy's nose. It licked hesitantly, then drank, trembling all the while. When the tiny body finally relaxed, Eli looked at Duke. "Guess you've got more faith than most of us. You didn't wait for someone to save you. You went and saved someone else." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and for the first time since that night, Duke's tail gave a slow, tentative wag. Eli chuckled softly. "Well, look at that. You're not all stone after all." He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the window. The snow outside reflected the porch light, glowing faintly like a halo around the station. The little pup gave a small yawn and curled against Duke's paw. Eli smiled, feeling something stir in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "All right," he said, setting down the empty bowl. "You'll need a name too, little one. Let's see." He glanced between them. "How about Luna? You came with the moon, didn't you?" Duke shifted slightly, lowering his head beside the puppy, as if in agreement. Eli chuckled again. "Duke and Luna sounds like a pair of angels to me." The heater hummed softly. The room smelled faintly of milk and wood smoke. Outside, the forest stood silent, the storm's memory fading into peace. For a long while, Eli just sat there, watching them. The sight filled something hollow inside him, the same space where loss had lived for too long. He whispered a small prayer. "If this is your doing, Lord, thank you. Maybe we all still have a purpose." Duke's eyes met his for a moment. It wasn't understanding in the human sense, but something deeper, quieter, the kind of knowing that didn't need words. As the night deepened, the lights from Turner's Gas and Supply glowed like a beacon against the endless snow, and for the first time since Marion's death, Eli didn't feel alone. Somewhere outside, the wind moved softly through the pines, almost like a voice, gentle, distant, and filled with peace. By dawn, Luna was asleep, safe between Duke's front legs. Eli sat beside them, his eyelids heavy, the warmth of the room wrapping him like grace. The morning light touched their faces, soft and gold, as if heaven itself had leaned close to bless the unlikely trio. The sun rose late in Silver Ridge, dragging its weak light across the frozen horizon. After nights of blizzard and silence, morning broke in a fragile gold that touched the gas station roof like a hesitant blessing. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of thawing snow and diesel from passing trucks. Eli Turner stepped outside with his old thermos, his boots sinking into the soft slush. He was getting used to the morning ritual now. Scrape the frost off the windows, feed the birds that always gathered near the trash bins, check on Duke and the little pup. He looked down and smiled faintly. Duke, the proud German shepherd with his thick sable fur, was sitting at the porch, his golden eyes steady and alert, though softer now than the first day they met. Beside him, wrapped in an old wool blanket, was Luna, the tiny puppy he had rescued from the forest. Her coat was pale cream, with streaks of brown along her ears, her body still thin but stronger by the hour. She wagged her tail clumsily when she saw Eli, bumping into Duke's leg, earning a patient nudge in return. "Well, look at you two," Eli said softly, setting his thermos on the steps. "Looks like we're a family now, huh?" The wind carried the faint sound of bells from the town church miles away. It was Sunday. Eli hadn't attended service since Marion's funeral 5 years ago. But now, watching Duke guard the fragile pup like a soldier standing watch over a child, he felt something shift inside him, like the first crack of light through a closed door. He walked back inside the station, grabbed an old towel, and began drying Luna's fur. "You're a brave girl," he murmured. "And you, Duke, you did what no man could, found her in the dark." Duke lowered his head modestly, eyes glinting with quiet pride. Eli placed a small bowl of milk near the stove, then poured himself coffee. The station was unusually warm that morning, not from the heater, but from movement, life, tiny sounds of paws tapping on the floor, the soft breathing of two creatures who had somehow turned his solitude into purpose. By afternoon, news had begun to spread. Silver Ridge wasn't the kind of place where stories stayed quiet for long. A customer came in, Martha Crowley, a plump woman in her 60s with a red scarf and the curiosity of a town historian. "Eli Turner," she said, eyes bright. "Is it true you took in a stray that rescued another dog?" Eli blinked. "How in the world did you—" "Tom saw it," Martha interrupted, referring to her nephew who drove a snowplow. "Said he spotted you bringing 2 dogs in from the woods that night. Words all over the diner." Eli rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "Well, it wasn't much. Duke here did the heavy lifting." Martha crouched to pat the dogs, her perfume mixing oddly with the smell of gasoline. "Lord, would you look at that?" she whispered. "They're like a storybook picture. Folks around here could use a bit of good news for once." By evening, 2 more townspeople stopped by, Pastor Raymond carrying a basket of bread, and Annie Lopez, a teenage girl who volunteered at the animal shelter. They left food, blankets, and even a small handmade collar with Duke stitched in blue thread. "Consider it a gift," Annie said shyly. "From the people of Silver Ridge." Eli stood at the doorway as they left, his chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to joy. The station had always been quiet, a place where the hum of the refrigerator counted as company, but now laughter, voices, and footsteps filled the space, like life itself had returned on 4 legs. That night, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, the kind that blankets the world without erasing it. Eli sat by the stove, the room dim except for the orange flicker of firelight. Duke lay nearby, Luna curled against his chest, their breathing slow and synchronized. Eli opened his Bible, the one Marion used to keep by the bedside. Dust had gathered on its cover. He turned to a passage she had underlined long ago. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." He looked at Duke. "Guess he's still keeping his word," Eli whispered. The next morning, something new happened. A local reporter from the Silver Ridge Gazette arrived, Caleb Foster, a young man with sharp eyes and a camera that had seen better days. "Heard you've got heroes living at your gas station," he said with a grin. "Mind if I take a photo?" Eli hesitated but nodded. Caleb knelt, snapping a picture of Duke and Luna sitting side by side, framed by the glowing sign and a curtain of snowflakes. The flash reflected in Duke's eyes, making them shimmer like gold. 2 days later, the story appeared in the paper. "Abandoned dog saves pup in Silver Ridge storm. A lesson in loyalty." Underneath, a picture of Duke and Luna appeared with the caption, "Two lives lost, found each other in the cold," and reminded a town what love still means. People began to visit Turner's Gas and Supply. Some brought donations, others just wanted to see the pair that had melted the heart of Silver Ridge. Children knelt to pet Luna. Old men nodded respectfully at Duke as though greeting a fellow veteran. Someone even tied a small ribbon around the gas pump with the words, "Hope lives here." Eli didn't know how to react. Part of him wanted to retreat. The quiet life he had built was safe, predictable. But another part, the one Marion had loved most, began to stir again. He caught himself smiling more, humming while he worked. And when strangers thanked him, he found himself saying, "It was Duke who did it, not me." One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, painting the sky in strokes of violet and fire, Eli stood outside the station. The air smelled like pine and melting snow. Duke sat beside him, tail sweeping softly across the porch. Luna bounded clumsily in the snow, chasing her own shadow. "Never thought I'd see this place come alive again," Eli said, half to himself. "You did that, buddy?" Duke looked up at him, ears perked. Eli could swear there was something in that gaze, a kind of understanding that reached beyond species. "You brought the light back," Eli said quietly. "Guess miracles don't always come how we expect." At that moment, Grace Miller, a woman from the local rescue center, pulled up in her red pickup truck. Grace was in her 40s with dark hair streaked with silver, and a kindness that came from having seen too much suffering to waste time on judgment. She smiled warmly as she stepped out. "Eli Turner, I thought I'd come see the miracle myself." Eli chuckled. "Seems the whole town has." Grace crouched beside Duke and Luna. "They're beautiful," she said softly. "And strong. You've done something good here." Eli shrugged. "I just opened the door. They did the rest." Grace looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Sometimes that's all God asks of us, just to open the door." Her words lingered like the last note of a hymn. That night, after Grace left, Eli sat by the window, watching Duke and Luna sleep near the stove. The station felt different now, lighter, as though the ghosts had finally moved on. He whispered a prayer he hadn't said in years. "Thank you, Lord, for sending them, and for reminding me that even in the coldest places, your light still finds a way." Outside, snow began to fall again, slow, soft, and peaceful. The sign above the station buzzed faintly, its pink and blue glow reflected in the puddles below. For the first time in a long while, Silver Ridge wasn't just surviving winter, it was healing. The wind returned to Silver Ridge with a low, haunting cry, carrying with it the scent of thawing pine and something else, unease. Spring was still weeks away, but the air had begun to shift. The snow no longer fell heavy. It drifted lightly, like feathers losing their will to fight gravity. Yet, beneath the quiet surface, something darker stirred. The gas station was busy that afternoon. A few locals stopped for fuel and hot coffee. Children from the town came to wave at Duke and Luna, who were lounging by the door, their collars gleaming with new tags that read, "Silver Ridge Guardians." Eli Turner had become a name people spoke with affection now, a man who brought hope without meaning to. But Eli had changed too. The lines around his eyes had softened. He smiled easier, laughed more. Still, every night before closing, he'd pause by the window and stare into the darkness beyond the tree line, where the forest began. It was habit, born of instinct. Duke always watched with him. Maybe both of them sensed it, the feeling that peace, as sweet as it was, never lasted long. That evening, as twilight painted the mountains purple, a sound cut through the soft hum of the station. A low, familiar rumble, tires crunching over gravel, headlights slicing through the mist. A white SUV rolled into the lot. its engine idling like a beast waiting for command. Eli's hand froze on the coffee pot. Duke, lying by the door, stiffened instantly. His fur bristled. Luna, now healthier but still small, tilted her head in confusion. From the SUV stepped a young couple, Mark and Allison Harrow. They looked well-dressed but hollow, the kind of people who wore smiles like masks. Mark was tall, dark-haired, his leather jacket pristine despite the weather. His wife, Allison, wore fur-lined boots and a distant stare. "Afternoon," Eli greeted, his voice neutral. "What can I do for you folks?" Mark gave a casual grin. "Actually, we came about the dogs. We saw them in the paper. They're ours." The words hung in the air like ice. Eli set the pot down slowly. "Yours?" "Yes," Allison added, her tone rehearsed. "We lost them during the storm. We've been looking everywhere." Before Eli could answer, Duke rose to his feet. His tail went rigid, his teeth bared in a low growl that vibrated in his chest. It wasn't rage, it was memory. Allison flinched, stepping behind her husband. Mark's grin faltered. "What's wrong with him?" Eli's eyes hardened. "Maybe he remembers." Luna whimpered, pressing against Duke's leg. The older dog stood between her and the couple, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the man who had once shoved him into the snow. The silence was heavy. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. "I don't know what you're suggesting," Mark said sharply. "But those dogs belong to us. You can check the tags if you want." Eli's jaw tightened. "Funny thing about that," he said. "When I found him, he didn't have a collar, just frostbite on his paws." Allison crossed her arms. "We can prove ownership." "Then you won't mind me calling the sheriff," Eli replied evenly. Something flickered in Mark's eyes, fear, then anger. "That won't be necessary. We'll come back with papers." He turned on his heel, motioning to Allison. She hesitated for a second, her gaze meeting Duke's. There was guilt there, faint but real. Then she climbed back into the SUV. The vehicle's taillights vanished into the mist, just as they had months ago. Eli knelt beside Duke, his hand brushing the dog's fur. "Easy, boy, they're gone." But Duke didn't relax. His gaze stayed on the road, ears pricked forward, as if waiting for the next shadow. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The air inside the station felt charged, as though the storm had never really left. He sat by the fire, Bible open but unread, the words blurring in his tired eyes. Duke lay near the door, restless, every sound drawing a twitch of his ear. Luna slept beside him, unaware of the ghosts creeping closer. Sometime past midnight, headlights flashed outside again, brief, then gone. Eli rose, heart pounding. He stepped to the window, but there was only darkness. The silence afterward was worse than noise. The next morning brought clarity and fear. A knock sounded at the door just after sunrise. Sheriff Henry Caldwell, an old friend of Eli's, stood there, frost dusting his hat brim. "Morning, Eli. Mind if I come in?" "Of course not," Eli said, motioning him inside. "Coffee?" "Please," the sheriff sighed. "Heard you had visitors last night. Couple in a white SUV?" Eli's stomach tightened. "That's right. Claimed the dogs were theirs." The sheriff nodded grimly. "You were right to call me. We checked the highway cameras. Same car was seen near Frost Hollow 3 months ago. Witness says they dumped 2 dogs before driving off." Eli's hand froze around the coffee pot. "Then it's them." "Seems so," Caldwell replied. "We've got footage. Want to take a look?" They watched it together on the sheriff's tablet, grainy black and white images from a gas station camera on the outskirts of town. The couple's SUV, the open door, a shape pushed out into the snow, the smaller one thrown farther, almost invisible in the blur. Eli clenched his jaw. "God help 'em." The sheriff nodded. "We'll bring them in for questioning. You just keep those dogs safe till then." When Caldwell left, the weight of truth lingered like a storm cloud. Eli knelt beside Duke and Luna. "You hear that, boy? Justice is coming." That afternoon, the town gathered outside Turner's Gas and Supply. Word had spread faster than the cold wind. People brought signs, candles, even flowers. A cardboard banner fluttered by the pumps. "Justice for Duke. Love deserves better," Martha Crowley cried openly. Pastor Raymond led a small prayer, his voice trembling with righteous anger. Grace Miller stood beside Eli, her face pale but resolute. "This is bigger than them, Eli," she said softly. This is about every creature that's ever been abandoned. Eli looked down at Duke and Luna, sitting quietly among the crowd. Then, maybe this town's finally found its heart again. That night, the gas station glowed like a lighthouse in the dark. People lit candles along the walkway. Snow fell softly, dissolving on the warm wax. Eli stood by the doorway, Duke at his side, Luna curled at his feet. He whispered, "Lord, if this is a test, give me the faith to keep them safe." Outside, the wind eased. For a moment, the world seemed to listen. Inside the station, warmth filled the room, the steady hum of the heater, the soft flicker of the fire. Duke lifted his head, eyes catching the light, alert but calm. The storm wasn't over, Eli knew, but neither was hope, and as he closed his eyes to pray again, the neon sign buzzed faintly above them, painting the word "Open" across the window in pink light, like a promise that no darkness would last forever. The courthouse of Pine County was a small brick building standing on Main Street, its white columns scarred by years of snow and salt. That morning, the flag above it fluttered weakly in the wind, its edges stiff with frost. Townsfolk crowded the steps, breath steaming in the cold. The story of Duke and Luna had reached beyond Silver Ridge. People had come from neighboring towns, reporters setting up cameras, children holding signs painted in bright colors. Justice for Duke. Hope for every soul. Inside, Eli Turner sat on the front bench, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wore his best flannel shirt, freshly pressed but still faintly smelling of engine oil. Beside him sat Grace Miller, director of the local animal rescue. Grace was calm, composed, but her eyes burned with the quiet fire of conviction. Duke lay at Eli's feet, head resting between his paws, while Luna slept curled beside him, a small symbol of peace amid the storm. Across the aisle, Mark and Allison Harrow whispered to their lawyer, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. Mark wore a suit that looked expensive but out of place, his confidence slipping each time Duke's low growl rumbled through the room. Allison's hands shook as she adjusted her scarf, eyes darting toward the door as if wishing to disappear. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Judge Miriam Hensley was in her 60s, stern-faced but fair, with silver hair tied back and eyes that had seen too many human excuses. "This court is now in session," she announced, voice echoing off the wooden walls. The prosecution opened first. Sheriff Henry Caldwell stood, hat in hand. "Your Honor, this is not a complicated case," he began. "It's a case of neglect and cruelty. The evidence will show that Mr. and Mrs. Harrow deliberately abandoned 2 dogs during a blizzard. One nearly froze to death. The other, by the grace of God, saved a puppy's life instead of losing his own." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The defense lawyer rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my clients admit they made mistakes. They were frightened. The storm was severe. They believed the dogs had run off, not that they were abandoning them. This was a misunderstanding, not malice." Grace Miller stood next, called as witness. She placed her hand on the Bible, her voice steady. "I've worked in animal rescue for 15 years, she said. "I've seen neglect. I've seen cruelty. But this was deliberate. Those animals weren't left behind accidentally. The bigger one, Duke, had bruising on his side, consistent with being shoved. The pup, Luna, was found half buried under snow, more than half a mile from the road." Mark shifted uncomfortably. Allison wiped a tear, though whether from guilt or fear was hard to tell. Caldwell presented the footage next. The room fell silent as the screen flickered to life. A grainy black and white video showing the Harrow's SUV stopping along the roadside. The door opened. AEC Shape Duke was pushed out. Then, seconds later, the smaller bundle, Luna, thrown harder, rolling into the ditch. Eli couldn't watch. He looked at the floor, hand resting on Duke's back. The dog trembled slightly, but not from fear, from recognition. When the footage ended, murmurs filled the room. Judge Hensley banged her gavel once. "Order!" Her voice cut clean through the air. The defense tried to recover. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, "my clients have suffered emotionally since this event. They have offered to donate to the shelter, to make amends." Grace's voice sliced through his. "You cannot buy redemption. You earn it." The judge's gaze moved to Eli. "Mr. Turner, please approach." Eli stood, clearing his throat. He wasn't a man used to speaking in front of people, but the moment felt sacred somehow. "Ma'am," he began quietly, "I didn't plan on any of this. That night, the storm nearly buried us all. I found Duke half frozen by my station. He didn't eat, didn't bark, just waited. 3 days, he waited for them to come back." His voice cracked slightly. "When he finally moved, it wasn't to save himself. It was to save someone else, that little one there." He gestured toward Luna. The pup stirred as if understanding her name. Eli continued, "I don't know what kind of world lets that happen, but I know what kind of faith it takes to forgive it. And that dog, he had more faith than most men I've met." A quiet sniffle came from somewhere in the crowd. Even Allison Harrow's eyes glistened. The judge leaned back, her gaze softening. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." After a brief recess, Judge Hensley returned with her verdict. The courtroom stood still, every breath held. "In this matter," she said, "the court finds the defendants guilty of animal abandonment and cruelty. You will be fined and banned from owning or breeding animals for the next 10 years. Mark slumped, his jaw tightening. Allison began to cry softly into her hands. But the judge wasn't done. Her tone softened as she looked toward Duke and Luna. "As for these two, I have no doubt they have already found their true home." She looked to Eli and Grace. "Mr. Turner, Ms. Miller, you are hereby recognized as the lawful guardians of Duke and Luna. May they live out their days under your care as symbols of loyalty and grace." The room erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled notes. Children cheered. Grace placed a hand on Eli's arm, her smile warm and bright. Outside the courthouse, the sun had come out at last, melting thin layers of snow into glistening puddles. People gathered around Duke and Luna, taking photos, leaving treats and flowers. The dogs stood proudly, tails wagging, eyes shining as if they understood. Eli looked up at the sky, its pale blue, vast and forgiving. "Guess justice came through," he murmured. Grace nodded beside him. "Justice and mercy. Maybe that's what this town needed." They walked together back toward Eli's old truck. Duke trotted ahead, Luna hopping along in his shadow. As Eli opened the passenger door, Duke paused and looked back at him, eyes gleaming with something more than recognition, something like peace. "Come on, partner," Eli said. "Let's go home." As they drove away, the road stretched ahead like a ribbon of light through the snow. The world, for the first time in years, felt whole again. That night, in Silver Ridge, the gas station glowed softly against the dark. The neon sign hummed, casting its pink reflection across the melting ice. Inside, Eli poured 2 bowls of food, while Duke lay by the stove, Luna beside him. Grace sat on a chair nearby, sipping tea, watching them with quiet wonder. Eli spoke after a while, voice low. "You know, I think Marion would have loved them." Grace smiled. "Then maybe they were sent to find you, not the other way around." Eli nodded. "Maybe so." Outside, the moon rose over the ridge, silver and bright. Inside, warmth filled the room, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. And as Duke lifted his head to watch the dancing shadows on the wall, it almost seemed that the world, once broken, had begun to heal. Spring crept into Silver Ridge like a shy guest, unsure if it was truly welcome. The snow retreated slowly, revealing patches of green that looked almost unreal after months of white silence. The mountains still held their icy crowns, but the valleys glimmered with thawed streams, whispering promises of new beginnings. At Turner's Gas and Supply, the sign buzzed faintly in the warming air. The once lonely station now looked alive. Flower pots lined the porch, filled with early daffodils planted by children from the town. The benches were newly painted, and beside the gas pumps, a small wooden board read in white paint, "Home of Duke and Luna, Guardians of Silver Ridge." Inside, Eli Turner stood behind the counter, reading the morning paper through the old pair of glasses perched on his nose. His hair, now whiter than the snow that used to fall here, caught the golden light streaming through the windows. The headline on the front page was weeks old, but still made him smile every time he saw it. "Faith Restored in Silver Ridge, a town redeemed by loyalty." He folded the paper carefully and glanced toward the door, where Duke and Luna lay stretched out on the sunlit floorboards. Duke, now 4 years old, looked stronger than ever, his thick sable coat gleaming, his eyes calm and proud. Beside him, Luna was nearly grown, smaller and lighter in build, but with the same spark of bravery. She had become the heart to Duke's strength, playful yet protective, never straying far from his side. The bell above the door jingled as Grace Miller stepped inside, carrying a basket of fresh tulips and a thermos of tea. Grace had become a regular part of Eli's mornings since the trial. Her rescue center was flourishing now, with new volunteers and donations pouring in. But she never stopped visiting Silver Ridge, saying it reminded her what goodness looks like when it takes root. "Morning, Eli," she greeted with her warm, steady voice. "Morning, Grace," Eli replied, smiling. "You bringing spring with you?" "Trying my best." She set the basket on the counter, glancing at the dogs. "And how are our heroes today?" "Living the life of saints," Eli said with mock seriousness. "Eat, sleep, guard the world from squirrels." Grace laughed softly. "Sounds like heaven." Eli poured her tea and leaned against the counter. Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawing pine. It was the kind of morning that didn't ask for anything, just gave quietly. "You ever think," Grace said after a moment, "that maybe God used them to reach this whole town?" Eli nodded slowly. "Every day. You know, I used to think faith was something you found in churches or prayers. Turns out sometimes it just walks into your life on 4 legs and refuses to leave." Grace's smile faded to something gentler. "Marion would be proud of you." Eli's breath caught, but he didn't look away. "Maybe. Took me a long time to remember how to feel anything but cold. But these two—" He glanced at Duke and Luna, now dozing peacefully. "They thawed something I thought was gone for good." Grace reached over and squeezed his hand. Neither said more. Words would have broken the stillness too easily. Around mid-morning, the sound of tires on gravel drew their attention. A white SUV approached the station, but not that one. This one was newer, clean, with a license plate from Denver. It stopped near the pumps, and a young couple stepped out. They looked nervous, holding the hands of a little boy, no older than 7. The boy's red mittens clutched a folded newspaper clipping, the same one with Duke and Luna's photo. "Are you Mr. Turner?" the woman asked gently. "I am," Eli said, wiping his hands on a rag. "How can I help you folks?" The man smiled awkwardly. "We read about what happened here, about Duke and Luna. Our son, he's been asking to meet them for weeks." The boy stepped forward shyly. "I saw them on the computer," he said. "The big one saved the baby one, right?" Eli chuckled. "That's right. They're heroes around here." The boy's eyes widened. "Can I pet them?" Eli looked to Duke. "What do you think, old friend?" Duke stood, tail wagging slowly. He approached the child with regal calm, lowering his head. Luna followed, sniffing curiously. The boy reached out a trembling hand and touched Duke's fur, his small fingers disappearing into the thick coat. Duke leaned into the touch, gentle as a prayer. The boy giggled, his laughter like a bell in the quiet air. "He's warm." "Warmest soul in Silver Ridge," Eli said softly. The family stayed for nearly an hour. They took pictures, shared stories. Before leaving, the man said, "We're looking to adopt. Maybe one day we could give a home to a rescue, someone like Luna." Eli smiled. "There's always one waiting to be found." As their SUV disappeared down the road, Grace turned to Eli. "You think you could ever let them go?" He sighed, eyes following the shrinking shape of the car. "If it's the right family, if it means another beginning, I could. I think that's what love is, not keeping, trusting." Grace nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. Weeks passed. The snow melted completely, revealing wildflowers bursting through the soil. Silver Ridge held its first spring fair in years. Children ran through the streets, vendors sold apple pies and handmade scarves, and a small booth stood near the church with a banner reading Silver Ridge Animal Rescue. Grace managed it, and Duke and Luna sat proudly beside her. Eli watched from a bench near the fountain, coffee in hand. His hair glowed silver in the sunlight. People stopped to shake his hand, thank him, tell him how the story had touched them. He smiled politely but humbly. Then he saw them again, the family from Denver. They approached slowly, the boy holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Grace looked up, her eyes softening. "We've thought a lot about it," the father said. "If it's all right with you, we'd love to give Duke and Luna a home, together." Eli's chest tightened. He looked at the dogs, playing in the grass nearby. Duke caught his gaze, as if sensing the moment. His ears perked, eyes steady. Luna barked once, bright and cheerful. Grace touched Eli's arm. They'll be safe, loved. He nodded. I know. That evening, the whole town gathered to say goodbye. The sun dipped low, painting the ridge in gold and rose. Duke and Luna stood by the SUV, tails wagging but calm. The boy knelt beside them, hugging Luna, then looking up at Eli. Thank you for taking care of them, he said earnestly. Eli smiled, his voice steady though his heart ached. You take care of them now. They'll protect you, just like they protected me. The boy nodded solemnly. Grace stepped beside Eli, slipping her hand into his. You sure you're ready? She whispered. Ready as I'll ever be. The engine started. Duke jumped in first, Luna right behind. Before the door closed, Duke turned back, eyes locking with Eli's one last time. Go with God, Duke, Eli murmured. You found your way home. The SUV rolled away, disappearing over the ridge, its white frame glowing in the setting sun. Eli stood still, watching until the last trace of it vanished. The wind lifted softly, carrying the smell of pine and the faint sound of laughter from the fair. Grace squeezed his hand. They'll be all right. He smiled faintly. I know. That's the miracle of it all. As the last light faded, the first stars appeared, tiny beacons over the mountains. The neon sign of Turner's Gas and Supply flickered once more, reflecting in Eli's eyes. For the first time in years, the world felt whole, washed clean by mercy. And somewhere beyond the ridge, under the same vast sky, two loyal souls began their new journey, proof that even from abandonment, love can be reborn. Sometimes God does not send miracles wrapped in light or thunder. Sometimes He sends them quietly, through a loyal friend, a kind stranger, or a moment that reminds us love is never truly lost. Duke and Luna were not just rescued, they became the rescue. In our own lives, we all face storms that test our faith, but if we keep our hearts open, God will always guide us home. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith and love. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and compassion. Type Amen if you believe miracles still happen every day.